Morning, everybody, or at least it's morning for me. We're giving a couple more minutes to see if we'll get any more live participants, and then we'll get started. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. You guys are all having a good day wherever you are. All right, I think we're pretty stable in our number of attendees now, so let's uh, let's go ahead and get started. Just want to say hello to everybody out there. Thank you all for being here. I really do appreciate it. We do see some friends on our attendees list and some people we haven't met yet, so we hope to get to know you guys as well. Today I wanted to kind of share with you guys a little bit about how we got started, where we came from, and just give you some background on who we are and our company and how Dr. Crockett and I, Russ and I got started with this product and what became and how we developed it, really. We wanted to give you guys something different than what we put out there. You guys are going to be the first to see some of the prototypes and early iterations of OptiSplint as we were developing it over the last few years. And we hope that you'll kind of learn something as you see what we did. We do hope that people out there will continue to push as much of this technology forward with us as possible. We really do want to see more clinicians doing these types of cases digitally and doing it with the kind of efficiency that you can when you're doing these digital cases. Feel free to, I have Alex with me today. She's our director of marketing. And she's going to be kind of monitoring the questions in the chat. So please feel free. I want this to be as interactive as we can make it. It's not a huge group of you, so I want to be able to give you guys the ability to ask questions and share comments and things like that with everybody. So please do ask your questions as you think of them. Don't feel like you have to wait till the end. And if there's any questions that Alex or I feel like we need to answer right away, we'll definitely address those as we go. So, but anyway, here we go. This is our first webinar, and I'm excited. If I'm being honest with you, I'm a little nervous, but it's part of our growth story, right? So we'll add this to our story as we go. But a little background on me. At the time that we started this company in 2020, I was working for InSequence. Started with them in 2019. I had worked at Strawman prior to that for several years, working as the university representative in the LA area, and and that's actually where I met Russ and a couple other really great people in my life. I got to get to know a lot of these residents really well. I really enjoyed hanging out with them. And what I think I got the most out of that experience was, at least when I was at Strawman, was just really learning about dentistry, from a academic and clinical point of view. It really opened my eyes to how much education is truly required to get to that level of dentistry where you see these prosthodontists that are doing things that just are really special. And I always have a heart for prosthodontists, especially because they they're the type that are always there to be the heroes, right? They always get the tough cases and they always get the tough patients. And so getting to know a lot of these clinicians in this environment was really kind of fun for me because it's when they're still kind of hopeful and wide-eyed and excited to get out there and learn as much as can. But I was working in sequence at the time, 2019, and there was a big change looming ahead of us, right? And so at the end of 2019, I attended this conference called DIA, Dental Influencers Alliance or something like that. Um, I got to meet some pretty cool people. Mike Picos happened to be there, Curry Levitt, some of the people you may know. And I attended a lecture that Joe Marinfar, somebody that we actually got to know better more recently, was putting on with August Oliveira. They were doing a bunch of these cases at the Brighter Way, full arch cases, and just implant cases in general. And they were showing, it was the first time I ever saw photogrammetry. And it just blew my mind that it was possible to do, I guess, full arch and get implant positions this way. It was one of those things that it's like an aha moment, and you never really get a chance to um, really see these things until they happen, right? So being there was just a huge moment for me, just to think, oh wow, I'm doing stackable guides. Is this going to be putting me out of a job pretty soon? So I started really thinking about it because, obviously you guys all know what happened in 2020. Coronavirus epidemic was looming upon us. We started to hear rumblings at the end of 2019, early 2020. But I was also in this stage in my life where, I'm sitting there. I was at this one of my kids' basketball practices holding my daughter. I was thinking about like where I've been, what I've accomplished in my life, right? I'm 43 years old. I have this photo of me in college with a group of friends, and the net worth of that room now is probably close to several $100 million. And a lot of them just became really, really successful. And I was like, man, I'm still kind of spinning my wheels here. I feel like my in sequence sales are going down, and things the market's changing. Everybody's making money in 2019, but what's going to happen years from now? So I started to get kind of worried and wanted to do something of my own. And at the same time, Dr. Crockett was I think 3 or 4 years out of residency by then, out of UCLA, and he was working at like 3 or 4 different offices, kind of traveling around between Prescott, Arizona, and Tempe. And then he was also teaching at AT Still as a professor. He was helping to write one of the chapters in Carranza's with some of the guys at UCLA. And so he was doing like 4 or 5 jobs at the same time too. So we were both kind of trying to figure out what we were doing. We kept in touch. We went fishing together a couple times. And it was the day, I think it was if you all remember, it was like March 11th was the day that the NBA canceled all their games. And that day, very next day, I flew out uh, to Phoenix to do an in-sequence case basically, and then I had dinner with Dr. Crockett Russell. We were having Chinese food, and we were just talking, and I was telling him all about photogrammetry, and he's like, "Yeah, I've been thinking about that for a year already, and what's changed and what's been going on." And I just can't believe how much it costs. I can't believe that it's a $40,000, $50,000 device. There's no way I'm buying that. It'll never be right for me. But I want to start doing cases like this, is what he was telling me, because it was so much easier. It took so much less time. And he while we were sitting there, he just showed me this photo of this early prototype of something that he was trying out. And he had this little case of these pieces, and you could see kind of uh, the early iterations of what OptiSplint was going to become. And you could see he was using these scan bodies. I think he had bought from I believe it was DES or something, or maybe they were OEM scan bodies. I forgot what they were. But he was clipping these plastic printed pieces to them. And then he had these frames that would give you the ability to lute everything together. And on, and make sure that you can actually pour a model from it and actually be able to cement something back into the mouth. And so these are the pieces that he was showing me, and I was kind of blown away at that moment. He was like, "Yeah, I was thinking about just uh, actually just doing a paper on this and then publishing the paper, getting kind of taking the academic route, right? Kind of showing a new way of doing this procedure." And I asked him, I was like, "Does this work?" And he's like, "I think I can make it work." And I said, "If you can make this work, we should start a business to do this." And that was kind of the day that we started Digital Arches. Was that night we just kind of started to formulate what our company would look like, how we would set it up, and kind of the roadmap for what we thought we needed to get to. And this thing was something that we thought, oh yeah, just a matter of time. We can take this product that he was showing me here, and we would actually make something out of it. But that was not at all the case. I mean, you could see this was in March 2020, and we didn't actually launch until the end of 2022. By October 2020, we actually did our first case up in Prescott. We did it with this Dr. Periodontist. Man, it's Jursic. Dr. Jursic was the first guy we did this with. We did it with a prime scan, and it wasn't pretty. You could see Russ over there, Dr. Crockett over there, crossing his fingers, hoping that it's going to print well. You could see, I didn't get a great picture of it, but you could see some of the pieces were luted together and how they fit onto those scan bodies. He had an early version of like a simple model that would be luted together um, with resin material, basically on a plastic piece that just held all the analogs in. And that's what we used for our models, cement the tie bases back into the prosthesis. And we actually delivered it that day. It fit really nicely. We managed to deliver it in less than a couple, or maybe even less than 3 hours, I think, when surgery was completed. It wasn't the most pretty prosthesis at all that day, but we did get the patient to walk out the door with the prosthesis, and we were pretty excited about that. November 2020, you could see the evolution of our scan body a little bit now, our system now. We were trying it out with surgical guides, bone reduction guides. We had made the cones a little different. Things were still being luted together, but you could see that things had been changing a little bit. But what was great about working with Dr. Crockett was that he and I could be talking about something that we want to change or make an adjustment to or improve, and literally like the next day I'd be able to have an STL file um, in my inbox that I could just start printing and just take a look at. And that was a lot of fun because we would just be talking about all these ideas and things that we wanted to try, things that we thought might make things better. We tried all these different sizes of frames. We tried all these different geometries, and it's just his ability that as a clinician and as somebody that understood how to design in Fusion AutoCAD just gave us the ability to iterate very, very quickly on what we were thinking. December 2020, we continued to develop things. You can see an early version of an arch tracer in the bottom left. We started playing with colors to see if color made a difference in terms of scanning and making it easier to scan. We tried this blue color scan body. It actually, I mean, I think we ultimately realized that color doesn't make any difference in these white light scanners. But it was something that we wanted to try. We put tie bases into our scan bodies to make them connect a little bit better, a little bit more accurately. But we were still kind of subjected to the inaccuracy of the printing that we had to deal with when we were printing these for a while. In January 2021, we started to continue to refine the design. You could see it kind of getting closer and closer to the version of the Opti-Splint that you guys know pretty well. Some of you have already seen or used. And then in March 2021, we actually made a peak version of our scan body. And the doctors that we were working with wanted to try scanning them intraorally without a frame. We would still end up luting them together, pouring a model if we wanted to cement tie bases and things like that. But you could see how our prosthetics were getting better, our process was starting to get better, and things were kind of moving a lot faster and a lot easier. So It was actually kind of a neat process to go through. We tried all these different materials. We tried milling these things and instead of just printing them to make it more accurate, different kinds of screws, different kind of screw seats, all that stuff, and different materials too. We tried PEEK. Here's a titanium version without where we didn't have a way to loop them together at all. That we wanted to try to see how accurate that was with just scanning in the mouth. And ultimately we found that it was working for a while, but you know, it wouldn't work 100% of the time. There was always some human factor of the scanning that would keep it from being really accurate, especially for the final prosthesis. And we actually learned from this that um, you know, the manufacturing of the scan bodies themselves and how consistently you manufacture them was a big factor in whether or not something would be passive when you go back into the mouth. So we kind of went back. We always kept going back to having a model, right? We always kept going back to making a jig and having a model, and that's really kind of what became the background of our device, and the signature aspect of our device is being able to create that verification jig that you can make a model from, and use that model to either cement tie bases or do whatever you need. But it also gave you the ability to design an exocad and do the full digital workflow with a lot of efficiency. In September 2021, we did a case over at Implant Pathways. I don't know if some of you have ever been there, but they have this big wall of implants and components from BioHorizon there. We did this case with Dr. Clark Chen, so you may know him on Instagram as Perio Pros Problems. It was fun because it was a day where it was just we all kind of knew each other pretty well. We were all friends. We were all hanging out, and I think we were even using an Omnicam that day, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe an early version of the Prime Scan. But um, uh, it again, we were able to deliver a prosthesis to that patient that day. I wish I got better photos of it, but you can see our kind of printer farm. So at for some reason, when we were at Implant Pathways, they had like a whole wall of uh, of sprint ray printers, but we could never get them to work. At least, between Russ and I. So we always brought our own Amazon printers to print on. And they seem to work better than those at times, but ultimately that's just what we were used to, so that's how we got it done. Of course, working at Pathways got us some attention, and we ended up at BioHorizons, and we pitched this to, their board. We kind of showed them our devices, we showed them what we were working on, and they were pretty excited. They had a lot of questions, they had a lot of ideas, and they were definitely part of our journey of showing kind of bigger companies, what we were doing. And I think what's hard about this whole industry is that you when you get to that level of executive, it's such a specific device and in such a specific kind of use state that it's hard for them to really capture exactly what the benefit of this over other devices out there are. In January, after that BioHorizon meeting, January 2022, this is kind of basically close to um, what we had brought BioHorizons with a few modifications. You could see in this case, we actually created some. They were still printed. They were printed on the most accurate printer that we could find at the time, and we actually made them somewhat unique from each other, so there would be less ghosting if we can do that. We tried different types of frames. Everything was plastic still. And this is actually the point where I made the decision to leave my full-time job and try to get this thing out to launch as soon as possible, thinking that this would be the right iteration. But we did quite a bit of testing with this version of it, and what we found was, plastic, and it doesn't matter what kind of plastic we used, whether it was PEEK um, or or printed resin or some other kind of milled resin or milled uh, plastic material. It just wasn't consistently accurate on every single case. It wasn't consistently right on every single case, and it didn't. It did the jig didn't always fit the model. like a couple months from now, because you leave it out in the sun, you leave it out in, you leave it out in some kind of light, the material might change. If you get hot or cold, that material might change. It was just more prone to those kinds of factors that cause inaccuracies that kind of pushed us towards making a metal version. So this was our first prototypes that we printed of the metal version that we wanted to manufacture. This is what we tested prior to manufacturing the actual metal ones. We had actually manufactured these in several different materials, not just aluminum. We had manufactured them in titanium, in stainless steel, in aluminum, and we wanted to see basically from a price point and materials and consistency of accuracy, whether or not this would continue to be accurate. But we were still using plastic frames at the time. We thought that they would be fine. We thought that they would be working, but we still ended up with the same problems that we were having before as jigs were changing over time as we left them out. This is our first version in July when we finally got to manufacture everything in metal. We decided to go with aluminum because we knew that this would end up being a one-time use device. We developed this product during the time of COVID, right? When everybody was really concerned about infectious diseases and possible contamination and things like that. And we wanted to make a device that we felt we could always stand behind. We knew that it would be accurate, where it didn't matter who used it, that it would be durable enough that that jig would still be accurate. I mean, I have jigs that we made on a model of Opti-Splint that from a year ago with the light cure material and all that stuff that still fit that model perfectly. And that's really when we knew we had something, and we started to kind of develop. This is where we started really our testing phase. I quit my job already. I was basically becoming a chairside conversion technician in the Orange County area. I was working with local doctors, basically doing full arch cases with them, whether it was a surgical case or a final case. And I would just test the use of Opti-Splint in those cases. You could see we did, a Yomi case. We did some with bone reduction guides. We did some with kind of some of our arch tracers. But by then we had also developed our scan caps as well to make some of the alignments a little bit easier. And that came from me just going to these appointments with converted dentures and wanting an easy way to align all the data when we went to a final. But everything always ended up back on that model. We always use that model, cement tie bases, whether it's for surgery or try-in or what have you, because we always wanted to make sure that the accuracy going back to the mouth was always going to be very, very passive. And we always had a way of double checking the passivity and the accuracy of the model by putting our Opti-Splint, taking it off the model that we know it's passive on the model, and checking it in the patient's mouth and making sure it's still passive in the patient's mouth. By September 2022, this is when we actually finally got our packaging and our kits. You wouldn't believe how much time it takes to get all organized and get all this stuff together. And we finally got that. We started packaging them. We started making them. We had one style of kit with one style of screw. And we put them on our website, thinking, oh, people will need this. People will want this. They're going to want to start buying them. We launched our website in September, digitalartist.com, and we were open for business. We sold one kit between September and November. It was a challenging time because nobody knew who we were. Nobody knew what we had. Nobody really understood. And it was hard for us to kind of get this idea out there that it was something that we can do. So in December was when we actually signed the deal with Rowe Dental Lab. We had met them at Dentsply World, and we were just talking with them, and they had actually been trying to develop something similar themselves, and they found our thing to be really interesting, and they started testing it to make sure it worked on their end, and it did work in their eyes. I happened to reach out to Ryan Dunlop at the same time that month, and that was the first time he did a case with me. And kind of once you get these big names backing us, the rest is history. I mean, we've really started to grow from there. With us being we have dental labs all over the country now that are kind of uh, uh, partner labs. We are partnering with all kinds of educational organizations that show you we'll show you the workflow, we'll show you the different ways of doing surgery and things like that. We're even partnering with iMetric, and because we feel like when we validate each other, we make each other stronger. And we don't actually feel like we're competing much with each other. They have their market, we have our market, and we're moving towards. But we have a lot of exciting, education kind of coming down the pipe, including more of these webinars. And we definitely will be discussing in future webinars, but not only the workflows, and we want to kind of condense them down into smaller pieces, but we'll be doing surgical workflows, restorative workflows, exocad workflows in future webinars. And so we'll definitely be discussing a lot of these different ways of using OptiSplint and how, whether you're a dental lab or a clinician or what have you, you're going to be able to be successful in learning as much as you can about this and how to use our library. But what is OptiSplint? I mean, OptiSplint ultimately is a single-use kit for full arch that gives you the ability to capture implant positions both digitally and analog. The simplest way we like to put it is it's a scannable verification jig. So you get the ability to scan it, whether in the mouth or on a desktop scanner or with your intraoral scanner on the tabletop. But you also get the ability to pour a model from it. So you can use that model to either cement tie bases or check the manufacturing of your devices. But people are always asking me, and making the assumption is like, is this an intraoral scanning device? And just making the assumption that the intraoral scanning device, that it is an intraoral scanning device. That's all it is. And that's not actually true. You can scan OptiSplint in the mouth, but if you scan it in the mouth, we would actually recommend that you pour a model from it and if you're designing using the scan from the mouth, and this is what we did often when we were testing and developing it, is even though we were designing from the scan in the mouth, we would actually use the model to cement the tie bases in the model to make sure that it's passive and accurate going back to the patient. But you could also what's great about OptiSplint is when you take it out of the mouth, it's still perfectly holding its positions and implant positions. So you can attach it to a scan plate and you could scan it. And we sell these scan plates as well. You could scan it on a scan plate to get with an intraoral scanner, so you can get a much better, much more cleaner scan with your intraoral scanner. And there's been studies that show with intraoral scanning that you can get as accurate as 40 to 50 microns of accuracy with certain intraoral scanners, especially with the latest generations like the Trios 5 and the Prime Scan and Prime Connect. These are giving you some really accurate scans. But of course, we highly recommend using a scanner that like a desktop scanner that's going to give you, when you're scanning this device, a 10 micron or better scanner, single digit micron scan of our scan bodies. And that's going to give you the best possible start to make a final from this. The OptiSplint scan body, it's made up of two parts. It's got the scannable portion, which is the sandblasted portion on the back. And there is a lutable portion, which is on the front. There's a vertical luting wing and the horizontal luting wing. It's important to understand that while we recommend filling the horizontal wing when you're luting it, that the frame, when you're luting it to the scan body, it doesn't have to be touching every part of this lutable portion. It could be just luted to the horizontal wing, or it could be just luted to the vertical wing, one or the other. It doesn't have to necessarily be luted to both. Of course, you'll get slightly better retention if you get luting material all around both but we really want to emphasize that there's a lot of different ways that you can loop these two pieces together, and make a really solid connection between these two parts. Our frames are also aluminum. They they're these hexagons that are so iconic now, and we're starting to see them everywhere. We're always joking, me and Alex, about how we always see hexagons everywhere we go now. But the frame is, yeah, it's aluminum piece. It's easy to cut. It's easy to adjust for the size of for different sizes of mouth. We give you 2 of them in every single kit to make it easier for you to no matter what situation you're in. We also give you these scan caps, alignment markers in every single kit. Pretty soon, actually, we're going to be injection molding these. We're printing them now. And they are they're basically giving you the ability to align different kinds of data. So the analog scan caps that you see on your left, those are used for aligning maybe like a converted prosthesis for a final prosthesis to the Opti-Splint, because the common data is basically the analog in the prosthesis and the analogs on the Opti-Splint jig. You can put this, and what's nice about these is they're just press fit. They're really easy to put into the prosthesis. You don't have to screw anything in to scan it all together. It makes it really simple because you're just aligning the bite. The scan cap alignment markers that you see on the right, these come in every kit as well. These will give you the ability to scan tissue. They can be used like healing caps after surgery, or after, when you're going for your final, they'll just be scanned with the tissue to give you the tissue scan and your jaw scan. These are really nice as well, just because, especially if you're suturing around them, they have this little undercut under them that makes it really easy to suture the tissue down and tamp it down onto the bone. We're actually thinking about creating a version of this that was made specifically just for suturing. People are always asking me how accurate Opti-Splint is. And it really is, because it relies on a couple of different pieces of technology, right? It is a scan body that we made ourselves, and all I can control is my manufacturing tolerance. So all of our critical tolerances for Opti-Splint are manufactured to about 20 microns. Anything better than that, if we try to manufacture, which we did try to manufacture to 10 microns or better, we ended up with quite a bit of waste. And so what we tried to do was, kind of make it so that we would still get pretty high accuracy and not have to kind of waste a lot of the ones. It would always be like, of the manufacturer scan bodies, we'd be wasting almost half of the batch if we were looking for 10 microns. And so we kind of chose this to be kind of the sweet spot for what we can do. Make sure we get something out there that we were proud of, right? We wanted to make sure it was consistent and repeatable in every single case. And we also guarantee every single one of our kits. So if any of you are unsatisfied or dissatisfied with the fit of any of your prosthetics, just give me a call, send me an email, let me know. And let's see if we can figure out the problem together. And if we can, that'd be great. And we'll be able to do something for, kind of get it to where you are and make sure you understand what you need. But if there is any problems with the fit, and it is certainly something that we can correct, I almost, for any reason, I mean, if even if you're just unhappy with me for some reason, I'm happy to replace or refund your order for you, or the kits that you purchased from us, for any reason. And I really haven't had to use this very often. Everybody that I think I mentioned earlier that we've sold we've sold and or given away to education close to 3,000 kits. I haven't really had to refund more than 1 or 2 times any of these kits at all. But when people are asking me about accuracy, I always ask them, like, how do you know when a prosthesis is passive? How do you determine that, right? Especially when you're doing it in the patient's mouth. When you're screwing a printed prosthesis in the patient's mouth, how do you know for sure that it's passive? And that's really hard, especially on printed prosthetics, because they don't feel like they don't naturally feel like a passive thing, especially if you're using a tapered screw like a Rosen screw. Passivity should feel like when you're putting a machined bolt into a nut made specifically for it. It should feel very, very easy and very, very easy to screw down all the way in the same consistency, right? All the way down until you hit the stopping point of when the nut hits the bolt, right? The head. And you shouldn't be getting much more than a little bit of a turn before it really tightens and you can't do anything. You can't push it anymore, right? Um, and that's uh, and that's really how it should feel, even in the mouth, right? So if things are not accurate, uh, uh, if things are not accurate, you're really going to notice um, uh, you'll feel it when you when you start screwing it and it screws and you start to feel resistance or friction or tension like for several turns. That's not a passive feeling, right? And that's really, in terms of putting something in the patient's mouth, that's really one of the few ways that you can kind of get an idea whether or not something is passive or not. But it's also important to understand that there is that the scanning, the record of the implant positions is not going to be the only thing that determines how passive your prosthesis is. You can't just say, I'm using a perfect way to capture those implant positions, so my prosthesis will always be passive. Um, not that is not an accurate statement, because there's so many other ways of of uh of capturing of having error as you're making your prosthesis, whether it's the scan body manufacturing tolerance. We'll talk about that, the digital alignment in the exocad library, the manufacturing accuracy and tolerance of the prosthesis itself. Whether you print it, there's one tolerance. Whether you mill it, there's another tolerance. All of that is compounded with human error through the process. If they use the wrong temperature to sinter the zirconia, that's going to be a different size. There's all these different things along the way that will create inaccuracies in that prosthesis, that if you collect enough of it, and we're talking usually about 150 microns or more of error in any one direction, then it's not going to be passive anymore. You're not going to feel that feeling of passivity where it's really loose until you start to feel just a half turn of tightness. You're going to feel a lot more resistance as it goes down. But just to give you an idea of how much error you can stack, if any of those systems out there, they're just saying we're just using intraoral scanners, right? So, let's say my criteria was 100 microns of error is the most that I'm willing to be okay with before I'm going to assume that it's not going to be passive anymore. So by using an intraoral scanner only on something, you're already almost halfway there in terms of the amount of error you might be introducing into that scan. And this does not even take into account alignment of the data, right? So there's quite a bit of error in that intraoral scan alone, and that does not account for human error as well and ideal conditions. Whereas a desktop scanner, you're going to get a much more accurate scan of whatever you're scanning in that scanner, right? So like this 3Shape here, I believe gets 4 microns of accuracy. But what a lot of people don't think about is the manufacturing tolerances of the implant parts. Like typical manufacturing, we did a survey, typical manufacturing tolerance for implant parts across the industry is about 25 microns. It's for the same reason that we chose 20 microns for ours. There's a lot of waste when you start to go below that. And in order to make these things, um, to mass produce these things, you really kind of have to settle for a certain tolerance when you're making these different parts. There's also a screw hole tolerance. And I'll show you another slide on that. But there has to be a certain amount of space around a screw thread in order for that screw to feel kind of passive going through that hole. It has to be at least 50 microns larger than the screw, and so you're just not going to get that passive feeling if it's kind of the same tolerance. So there's kind of a lateral possible movement of these parts on the MUA that you're going to get on these scan bodies, no matter what. And it's certainly something. That's why it's like a desktop scan. Yeah, it's 10 microns, but if I made my scan body to be 25 microns of tolerance, then even though it's 10 microns of the scan, there's still an extra 25 microns of tolerance of additional error that I'm just introducing to that system. But this is what an example of that screw hole tolerance. You could see if it's everything's centered, there's it's right in the middle of that hole, right? But there's a lot of opportunity for that screw to be shifted. If there was the the scan body was just moved a little bit to the side and you screw it in, it's going to be favoring one side or the other, right? And so having this is important for your record, or having trying to be as centered as possible is important for your record, but having some space for some error when you're making your prosthesis is also important. So you want to have some slop when you're making your prosthesis, so that even if something's a little bit off, it's still going to be very, very passive, because the hole itself will give you a little bit extra room for that error to occur. What we did with Opti-Splint was we made a conical connection to the top of the MUA so we can make sure that the screw is centering the scan body right over the MUA connection, so that we can get as accurate and repeatable of a connection between the MUA and the Opti-Splint scan body, especially on a physical model, to be as accurate and as passive as possible. And people are always saying, well, photogrammetry says that they're accurate to single digit microns, just like the desktop scanners, right? And if you're only talking about the digital part of photogrammetry, because photogrammetry in essence is two parts, right? There's a scan body part and there's a digital part, the camera, right? And if you're just talking about the camera, I mean, the iCam, for example, when you're scanning, the digital scan of an iCam is within 5 microns, if not even better. I mean, it is one of the most accurate things from a digital point of view as you could possibly get. But when they report these accuracy measurements or precision measurements, they're usually not reporting the variance that you would get from the scan body tolerances, right? And so they're kind of only reporting half of the accuracy story in photogrammetry. Usually, when you look at studies of photogrammetry, they're being done basically they're basically being done where they just put the scan bodies, like on the non-randomized study design, where they just put the scan bodies on the model. They don't touch the scan bodies and they just scan it 10 times. And you're going to get a very, very high precision scan when you do that. But what we did differently, and what we were starting to teach some of the other large organizations and when they're vetting these technologies, is what they should be doing. It's more, and what we think is more true to life is a randomized study design. We're actually taking the scan bodies, putting them on, scanning it, randomizing in a bag of 8, and then putting 4 more on, scanning again, and doing that 10 times. Right. So obviously the second one is more true to life because you're putting those onto the patient every single time. And you could see when you do a non-randomized study, the precision of these scans was extremely accurate. So this is the variance between the 10 scans from each other, right? So the 10 scans and the distances between the implant positions, right? So you could see basically you would have to cut this number in half. We're really close to that single micron accuracy when you're scanning it directly 10 times. These photogrammetry machines, when they're using new scan bodies, they really are incredibly accurate. Now, when you actually go to a randomized model and you add that scan body accuracy and manufacturing accuracy into it, that changes the story significantly. You could see the effect that the screw hole tolerance has on the accuracy and the precision of this device being repeated over and over again. Now the story is about 40 to 60 microns of accuracy. And that makes sense in terms of the distances from each other, because we're measuring the distances between two implants, right? And so, if one is moving away and one is moving close, and also in the opposite direction from these two points, we might actually get we could see that 50 micron screw tolerance basically right there in this data. And the question that I always had about photogrammetry, especially because we developed our device in during the time of COVID, was, should scan bodies that are used intraorally, should they be reusable, right? The amount of blood and tissue and saliva, I mean, even if you're putting these through autoclave and things like that, I mean, it's still, and I think when we first started doing it, I think PIC was saying that you can't autoclave it, so you can only cold sterilize them. And I really questioned whether or not how sterile or how clean you can actually make these things, prior to using them. And I saw multiple times where someone would bring in some PIC flags to a case that they're comparing our system to their system. And those PIC flags, you put them into hydrogen peroxide and they start to bubble. And it just didn't sit right with me. But how do you even know how many times these scan bodies? Who's keeping track of them? We've actually seen a lot of cases where OptiSplint's actually discovered um, bad scan bodies that haven't been replaced since they got the photogrammetry unit, and they just never knew. They just assumed that it was always going to be accurate, will continue to be accurate at that single-digit micron range. And they had no idea that one of their scan bodies was actually not working anymore or working properly. Some of these scan bodies are made out of plastic or PEEK. We found with the ones that we made out of PEEK and plastic, even the hardest ones we could find, they still got damaged pretty easily. Patients would bite on them, or the screw would dig into them. A lot of things made those things kind of inaccurate pretty quickly. And then, heat, UV, chemicals, those things can all change anything that's made out of plastic. And then the screw, of course, like they give you one screw with these scan bodies, and over time, if you're using it over and over again, even if you're just hand tightening them, they can actually get pretty fatigued over time. And then there's always this debate in this question, right? Of modelless or model, tie-base or direct to MUA. And when it comes to OptiSplint, we always think, well, why not? Why can't you have the best of both worlds? This debate happens a lot because of photogrammetry, right? This debate happens a lot because with photogrammetry, it's a little bit more difficult. I mean, it is possible to create a model from photogrammetry, but you'd have to mill a bar from the record. And in order to mill that, and then once you mill that bar, then you use that bar to pour a model from it, and then you can check. But then the problem with that is that bar is a perfect representation of the digital record. So if there's anything wrong at all with the digital record, you're just recreating that problem with that bar. Whereas with OptiSplint, the digital record of that we use in ExoCAD after we scan it, and then we use the library on it and all that stuff and align it in ExoCAD, it's going to be slightly different from the analog model. And so when those fit together, when a prosthesis coming from our digital scan fits our model, it's actually validating and verifying the accuracy of our device. And then people are always debating like, oh, tie bases are bad, or we shouldn't be using them, or everybody should be using tie bases, or we should go direct to MUA with both zirconia imprinted. Well, again, like why do you have to be forced to choose one or the other? Just because you can't have a model makes you very, makes your feelings very strong in terms of not using tie bases, right? Like I always wondered if photogrammetry gave you the ability to continue to have a model so you could cement tie bases and check your manufacturing prior to putting something back in the patient's mouth, would there be as much vitriol against tie bases, and would there be as much vitriol as there is against models? I don't think there would be. And I think as we move more mainstream with OptiSplint, going into more labs, going into more clinics where they're doing, there's referral relationships, we're going to see that both of these concepts are going to be much more valuable to dental labs that are serving their customers with it. And ultimately, what we love, remember that equation that I showed you earlier of all the different places along the process that you could accumulate error, whether it's a printer error, or things are not curing right, or you over cured or you under cured it. You're not using like a validated I like the Dentsply printer these days. I've seen the new materials on it. And it's really cool because it literally comes out OSHA compliant, right? Like you never even touch it. It's cured a certain way. I also love the Strawman validated workflow as well because everything is kind of enclosed. You're supposed to do it one specific way. When you start to, and this is something we learned ourselves, when you start to combine third-party printers, third-party curing units, and third-party washing stations, like you're going to add more error to that process. And I had one lab tell me that when they were testing everything on the model, they actually found that error happens more often than not in terms of creating enough error that things don't fit the model after it's printed or after it's characterized, because as you're characterizing, you're curing too. But again, like being able to cement tie bases or not, I mean, it really does, um, being able to do that at the very end and being able to eliminate that error at the very end that's created through the process with either a tie base or just checking it on the model. You're able to kind of, not just feel like you have accuracy from your record, but now you have accuracy even right before you're going back to the patient's mouth, and you could be more assured of that passivity. But just like I was saying before, when you look at our our device, is this validating or is it redundant, right? And in our case, it is validating because the scan of the OptiSplint is actually a little bit different from the physical model that we make from OptiSplint. And so when those fit each other, then whatever we make from the digital record fits our model. They're validating the accuracy of our device. Whereas like with photogrammetry, because you're making your bar from your photogrammetry record, it's a redundant record, right? The model that you make from your photogrammetry record digitally is actually should be no different than your photogrammetry record. So if there's any problem with that scan body or needs to be replaced, it's going to be the same problem in that bar and that model that you make. And this is actually a test case we did with some of my friends up in denture artistry up in Bend, Oregon. They're doing some really cool things up there, and they're always trying new things. But they actually printed two of the same prosthesis. They were using an Asiga printer with rotomaterial, and they wanted to see if there was any variance between, when they first come out of the print, how accurate is it on the model? And we found that they're pretty accurate on the model when they first came out of the print. And then after we cure it, what happens then, right? And we cured one on the model, one off the model, and we found that the one cured on the model stayed passive to the model. The one cured off the model ended up not being passive anymore. And that was a big aha moment for us because, no matter how much we try to get a perfect record, any kind of manufacturing after the fact could change things. We even did a case of all the different photogrammetry machines, Micron Mapper, PIC, iMetric, and OptiSplint at Full Arch Masters. And one of the things that we did was at the end, we printed all the prosthetics on one of the printers, and it was actually not all four of them were not passive to the model after we printed them. And so we ended up printing it on the Strawman printer that had that validated workflow. And it ended up all four of those were actually perfectly passive to our model. And so it just tells you kind of, if we didn't have a model that day from OptiSplint to check things on, we may not have printed it a second time. We might have been giving the patient a not really truly passively fitting prosthesis that day. But yeah, that's really kind of our story in terms of the introduction to OptiSplint for now. I know some of you might have some questions. And let me just check to see some of them. So I have a question from Jordan Siegel. Can you discuss the workflow for scanning same day of surgery? I promise we will have a webinar that we will be talking about all the different workflows that you can do with OptiSplint. We'll probably start with final prosthetic workflows before we get to surgery. We really do want to kind of build up to it. And we want to make sure that you understand as much as possible kind of the different ways that you can use OptiSplint, and make sure that things are going to go really well for you. So I promise we will do that on a future webinar, not today. And we'll definitely do that. I have a question from Ilan Tarash, our friend out in Israel. Um, if Danny can relate to the protocol, how to use plastic analogs. Again, yeah. Basically, we're going to be doing that in a future webinar for sure. How to align things in ExoCAD as well. It's going to be a completely separate webinar from the workflows, because we really want to get in there and show you how in ExoCAD how to align that data, and that's going to be happening in future webinars over the next several months. So we have a question from Milo Kawabregu. Sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, but an OptiSplint we were able to use for multi-unit abutments. Is it possible to use when we want to make full arch, but with tie bases? So yeah, I mean, you can do full arch with tie bases. I'm not sure if you're thinking about going direct to an implant. We're trying to figure out how best to. So I discussed, I think, in my presentation that you can use tie bases with OptiSplint, especially because you have a model to cement the tie bases with. And so that should answer that question. But if you're talking about going straight to an implant, we are looking, I think one of the first connections that we're going to be exploring is the kind of classic Zimmer connection. And we might actually make that first in terms of a direct to implant version of OptiSplint in the future. It is on our roadmap. It's not something we're doing right away, but it is something that we plan to do soon. Um, uh, Actually, a local friend, Dr. Gary Glassman, are you planning to provide a screw that is compatible with needent threads, but not use an 050 driver for Zimmer? Currently using needent MUAs, which require you needent driver to remove stage 1 and Zimmer driver to place and remove. So yeah, that's actually already available, Dr. Glassband. You could order Neodent kits from my website, and you can use the same driver for your Neodent, um, uh, for your Neodent implants as well as for the OptiSplint. So that is available today. That we released that, I think April of this year. I know our last conversation with you might have been kind of January or of last year, or even December. Khaled El Said his question is using the intraoral scanner alone sufficient to achieve passive fit? And are the parts reusable or single use? So an intraoral scanner can be sufficient to achieve passive fit if you also use a model to cement tie bases from that intraoral scan. We also find that because of the larger geometries that we use for printing, that a printed prosthesis, if you're using an intraoral scanner outside the mouth on a scan plate, a printed prosthesis from that record going directly to the MUA is generally good enough to get a pretty passively fitting prosthesis, even without a model. So there are different ways to use OptiSplint that would make the intraoral scan alone sufficient. It's just kind of using a model to make sure that that's actually accurate. But in terms of if I was making a final and I wanted to make a zirconia final, I would still scan OptiSplint with a desktop scanner, even if I'm cementing tie bases into a zirconia, because you really want to have a smaller cement gap as you can when you're doing that. Another one from Dr. Tarash, how much blue and the best fitting, and where should we expect? So when you're actually doing the best fit match in ExoCAD, first of all, you want to make sure if you're aligning the OptiSplint scan in terms of the implant position in the wizard for ExoCAD, then I would say yes, absolutely. You want to get as much blue as possible. If you're not getting a lot of blue, then your scanner is probably not a great scan. So I would definitely recommend either taking that out and scanning in a desktop scanner. And then, but you should be getting mostly blue and very little green in that alignment. If I use MIS, Am I supposed to be using only Rosen screws? So the issue that we have with MIS right now is, and I just got the screws for MIS, and we actually just manufactured a batch of MIS scan bodies as well that are made specifically for the MIS screw. And right now, in terms of the type of screw that fits into the MIS MUA, there aren't that many 1.6 millimeter screws. They're basically, it's a metric M 1.6 screw that fits into the MIS MUA. We are making a scan body to fit that, but you're either going to have to end up using a tie base from MIS or something like a Rosen screw that has a 1.6. So you got another question from Dr. Gary Glassman. Any difference carrying on analogs with no model? I'm not sure what you mean by this question, but you're welcome to call me separately if you like to kind of go over that. But yeah, I'll have to better understand what you're asking there. Any chance you might make a kit for Dentsply Conus appliances? So that's actually something that I've been thinking about quite a bit. We were wondering, one of the things that we'd have to work with Dentsply on is actually some way to create their Conus geometry in the exocad record. So we would need the actual Conus internal connection geometry that we could print directly into the prosthesis that we're printing. I actually think that would be a really interesting way of doing full arch, especially for a temporary, especially if we can get something that is almost like a press fit and will be very stable. If there's some way that we could even make sure that it's not going to move very much, or it's not easily even removable for the patient during the healing time. If we printed something, and then in the final stage, obviously we just make something with Dentsply. But right now, we don't have that geometry, so we'd have to be able to work with Dentsply in order to get that. And it would have to show a lot more interest in doing more with OptiSplint in order for us to get that. So we're still definitely working with them on doing that. I think that's it. Don't think we have any more questions. Does anybody else have any questions? So Alex, also, if you look at the chat, if any of you if any of you have any questions, or if any of you want to take advantage of our discounts for attending this webinar, we are offering everybody that attended this webinar live $100 off an OptiSplint starter package. If you click the link in the chat, it'll take you directly to the product page for that, and it will automatically apply your discount for that. If you already went to our website and you're already at that product, you can use the discount code 23web0929 to get that $100 discount on that first starter kit. So feel free to go ahead and do that. Oh, okay. Hold on. Got it. Going to QA. Vortex screw. So yeah, Vortex screw is available. The Vortex screw is actually available for our with our exocad library. So you can actually use the Vortex screw. We do like that screw. It's definitely got some advantages, and it does dress a need out there, and it does seem to work pretty well. It's not as tapered as the Rosen screw, which is something that we like about it because it gives you still a little bit of that the slot that you really need to make sure things are going to be seated correctly. I think Danny Dominique's done a really great job kind of coming up with that idea. And we hope that more people will continue to develop things like that. But yes, it is available as connection geometry in the library. And I actually worked directly with Danny Dominique to make sure that it worked really well with OptiSplint. Is there a current solution to use Implant Direct legacy implants? So Implant Direct legacy implants right now uh, their their MUAs are a metric 2.0 millimeter screw. So the threads are massive. And they're not standard Nobel type screws for that MUA. They're about the same size, but they're not the right. Um, they're not the same in terms of the screw, just like the MIS. And the way that I would get around that is basically you would want to purchase a BioHorizon type. Um, uh, you would want to purchase like a BioHorizon type MUA. Um, uh, that is like on DES. DES actually, all of their MUAs, I believe, on DES, when you buy them, for whatever system that you use, it converts it to a Nobel compatible MUA platform. And so all of those will end up working with OptiSplint. So a lot of these systems that are out there that have a unique direct to implant connection, DES actually makes MUAs for them. They're $50. They're a great deal. And they convert those. They convert them to a um, they convert them to a basically a standard Nobel that will be compatible with OptiSplint. So yeah. So yeah. Any other questions? Well, I just want to say thank you to everybody for being here with me and spending and doing this first webinar with me, making it painless. I hope you guys learned something. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing our story and seeing where we came from. You have my phone number. Please feel free to text me, call me anytime you guys have anything for me. I really do appreciate a lot of you. I do have a lot of friends today on this as well, and hope to see you guys out there really soon, and we'll get more of these going in the future. Thanks a lot.